So I have this very simple Next.js site where I can flip users' authenticated status from being not authenticated to being authenticated. All the things related to authentication are handled by aws-amplify, AWS Cognito, and this auth class. I'm using this onLogin function to sign the user in using my secret credentials, and onLogout to sign the user out. This useIsAuthenticated hook checks the current authenticated status. So all it does is just awaits the current user session, and if that is not throwing, then sets the user as authenticated. There is also this useEffect hook, which just listens to authenticated related events and sets the state accordingly. Going back to our site, it is working great. I can clearly set the user's authenticated status and toggle between them. But there is one problem, and that problem is only visible if I refresh the page. See, that loader showed up. While this setup may be okay for you, I think it's a bit suboptimal. I would like to display the authentication status as soon as possible, hopefully without this loader. So I would like to have users' authentication information available for me at the dashboard component level here as a prop. So I can remove this hook and I can remove this loading condition. And this is possible with Next.js using a data fetching hook called withSSRContext get server-side props. To do that, we have to export a variable called get server-side props of type get server-side props. This is a synchronous function which takes Next.js server context, and inside this function we'll have to return props for our component to consume. So we can imitate what the useIsAuthenticated hook is doing. So this means creating a try-catch construct and then awaiting the auth current authenticated user. And if that did not throw, well, then we can return props authenticated of true. Otherwise, we can return authenticated of false. With that, the authenticated status is available for us as a prop. And we can remove the hook, and we can remove this loading status. So let's try. I'm not authenticated. I will click login. Of course, the UI did not update because I removed the hook, which was performing state updates. But if I refresh the page now, hopefully I should be authenticated, right? Well, that's not the case. So what's happening? Well, we are checking the authentication status using get server-side props. But this auth instance here is not server-side aware. It is not using the Next.js server context to maybe extract some cookies, which can help us to determine if the user is authenticated or what's the user current session. And previously, it was hard to make the aws-amplify and auth work in the server-side context. But recently, a new abstraction was added called withSSRContext. This is exactly what we need in our case. This allows us to create a server-side aware version of this auth module. So, auth with server-side context, and we'll pass the context exposed by Next.js. We created an auth module here, which is server-side aware. So hopefully now the current authenticated user will not throw when the user is indeed authenticated. So let's validate our solution. I'm not authenticated. I will click login here and refresh the page. And I'm still not authenticated. So what's going on now? My auth class here is clearly server-side aware because I'm destructuring it from withSSRContext. But this auth class here and this auth class here is not. And even though we are working on a client here, we still have to use server-side aware instance of that class. This is because when the user signs in, if the auth class is derived as server-side aware, then it will set a special set of cookies which will help this auth class here identify the current user. So in our case, all we have to do is create a server-side aware instance of the auth module here, even though we are working on a client. And of course, we will not be passing Next.js context because we can't. There is no context to pass here. We can remove this import here. And now this auth module here is server-side aware. So we are using server-side aware method, sign in and sign out. And this auth module here is server-side aware as well. So now when I click login and refresh the page, I'm authenticated. This is because when users signed in, the auth module here set a special set of cookies which will be in turn passed to this context, which in turns will be read by the withSSRContext here and help aws-amplify to get the current authenticated user. So to recap, to make sure that aws-amplify and especially auth module works with Next.js, use newly added withSSRContext construct to create server-side aware instance of the auth module.